Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're back in War Thunder, and today it's time to talk about voice communication. Now, this has been a topic that's been debated over many years for no particularly good reason, in my opinion. Voice communication is generally something that will always benefit a game. I've never had a game where it hasn't benefited it. Maybe a game, to give an example, which, if it had voice communication, it would be kind of pointless, would be some kind of one-on-one game, like something like even Hearthstone would be an example of this. Even StarCraft, voice communication could be key if you're trying to coach someone or something like that. But when it comes to team games, such as War Thunder, I believe voice communication is not necessarily a necessity, but it is something that doesn't really hold many disadvantages. There is no real reason to not have it in your game if you want to try and get a better, basically more competitive when it comes down to it. If you have people communicating by voice through the game, they're going to probably be more. They're going to be concentrating more because they're not going to be just concentrating on the game. They're going to also be concentrating on what is being said. Map awareness obviously benefits largely from this, and even if you want to take it as broad as you want, it helps people develop social skills. One of the things I used to really struggle with was the fact that giving speeches and stuff like that, which is something that I have to do in my job, I struggled. I really struggled with being sat in front of a crowd and talking. Now, after doing YouTube and having talked into a microphone for a few years, I'm much more comfortable with it and see it much more as an everyday thing now. So if you want to, broaden it that much, it will help people with social skills, which generally, games aren't really designed to do, but it's always a nice little added benefit which is there anyway. Now, what I'm talking about specifically in War Thunder is in a realistic battle or simulator battle, being able to communicate by voice with players that you're not squadded up with. If you know about War Thunder, voice communication is already in the game. If you even go to your settings tab, if you go to game options, you will see that there is a voice chat tile, I suppose you would call it. There's also radio, so if you want to listen to the radio, you can do that if you want in-game. But there is a voice chat settings, and you may wonder, why is this here? Now, this has been here for many years, maybe at least 2 years. I remember using it back. And what it does, it means that if you're in an organized squad, so before the battle, what you do is you set up, invite a few players and bring them to the squad. You can communicate between each other through War Thunder. Now, generally, people will use Discord or TeamSpeak or something like that, but if you meet somebody in a match and you're like, hey, let's squad up, hey, let's have a chat, maybe they don't have Discord or TeamSpeak, maybe nobody has a server, so, you can talk to them in-game. So, the core voice communication software is obviously already mounted in the game. So what I'm proposing is to try and expand it so it's also open in realistic and simulator battles. Now, there are obviously many advantages to this. As I said before, map awareness is probably one of the big ones. In realistic and simulator, maybe not in arcade because it's very much a jumbled mess, but it could still be useful there. There is no negatives for it in that mode when it comes to actual play. But focusing on realistic and simulator, if you have somebody on your team and they call out, hey, Focke-Wulf above you, or BF-109 east of my position, something like that. Maybe if you're in a dogfight and there is one guy on you, you're trying to deal with him and you don't see the second guy, maybe one of your teammates can call him out so you know which way to turn. Maybe somebody just has some advice. Maybe if you're in a Tempest and you're against a BF-109, something like that, the Tempest Mark V or the Mark II, and somebody calls out, hey, you can outrun him, okay? If you dive, you can outrun him, you can sustain your speed faster than him. Just do this, and also, I'll be back up in the air in 2 minutes, I'll come and help you out. Now, obviously, this is the best case scenario, but still, you can see how it would be effective. It would also mean that some of the large issues that a lot of players have when it comes to how bombers, fighters, and attackers all work together, they would be pretty much solved instantly if people used voice communication. The bombers could tell the other bombers where they are going to bomb. They can also notify the fighters where they're going to go, what altitude they're going to be at, if they need to be defended. And also you can just design strategies around the fact that you have voice communication. At the end of the day, let's say you're in a 2v2 or a 3v1, something like that, right at the end of the battle where you're trying to find the last person. Maybe you can try and set up a strategy between people where you work out which parts of the map you're going to look for, which parts of the map he's probably going to be in. Maybe somebody knows he's near the airfield. Now, you can do all of this in text chat. But the thing is, as many games has shown, instantaneous responses can be very, very useful. There was kind of, just on a side point, I've been reading a book called Tankmen. Wonderful book, and they talk about, in one of the early chapters, in the 1930s, when the British were first using radios when it came to tank command, trying to work out how to be able to communicate between them. And one of the key things that they always talked about, how ridiculous it was, because basically what they would do is you would have your main head of command at the back, away from the battle. Then you would have a long-range radio on a jeep in the middle of the tanks, and then the tank... you would have a jeep in the middle of the tanks, and then the jeep would convey the messages to the tanks, not through radio, but through hand signals and stuff like that. And they said it was completely confusing and everything like this, but you could see that communication in that type of situation was key. Voice communication was the king of the world. So therefore, in a game like War Thunder, you can also see why it would be very useful. Now, going back to the text and voice communication, text is useful. We also have many things in War Thunder which are very useful. One of the commands I use quite a lot is hit T, which is the normal bring up the quotes, and then I hit 1 and 7, T17. That basically means over here there's a guy, go and attack him. Now, even though it is very simple for me to do that, if I'm able to communicate audially with my nearby allies, I can give them a hell of a lot more information. I can tell them, Bearcat on 6, 1200. Something like that. So Bearcat on my 6, 1200 above. Something like that. Something very simple. And it gives them a lot more information than the text. And this happens in all games. And we'll get in some examples of games where this works. So, some examples of games with voice communication that are around and that I've played. I understand there are many other games which are around which also have voice communication. So Counter-Strike, mainly Global Offensive. Obviously it's a 5v5 game, so communication... There's not crazy communication everywhere, but it is a game which necessitates voice communication. If you had to text chat, or if you had to basically just go on a whim and try and read off the map, it's nearly impossible to do, and voice communication gives it that extra edge to make it a bit more competitive. Halo 3. Now, I played Halo 3 a very long time ago on Xbox 360, and it was one of the first games where voice communication was a big thing. Same with Call of Duty Modern Warfare, but we'll stick with Halo 3 right now, because I used to play the large games in Halo 3, where you had a lot of people and a lot of stuff going on. And voice communication still worked. It still worked pretty well. And it was just kind of a nice experience, because it meant that you could flood out the map. If someone was covering one area, they could tell you, then you could cover their arse, or you could cover a different way of looking out a certain door. It was good. The next one is Dota 2. Now, Dota 2 is a game that I play a lot, and once again, it's another 5v5 game, which benefits greatly from voice communication, because we have examples of other MOBA games which are 5v5 which don't have voice communication, League of Legends being one of them. Paragon, a new game which just came out in beta, which I've been playing a lot of. And you can see the communities, especially in League of Legends, they have been clamoring for voice chat for years. Because it makes everything a bit clearer. Even if somebody, you struggle with somebody's accent or there are language barriers, you can still communicate better than just pinging on a map or giving really small responses. And it's just how it is, unfortunately for some people who struggle with their speech and everything like that. Another example is Call of Duty Modern Warfare, a game where I mainly played Search and Destroy. Hardcore Search and Destroy, where it was once again 5v5, and very key that voice communication was used. Because you had to be able to cover certain parts. You had to be able to cover certain parts of the map, and without voice communication, with a team of randoms, you've got to remember, this is with randoms in mind, you have to have voice communication when you're in that kind of scenario. And for me personally, I believe that is completely, you can easily compare it to War Thunder. With War Thunder, what you have is you have a game which doesn't have any matchmaking. The devs have said that when it comes to, skill matchmaking. When it comes to skill matchmaking, there is no matchmaking there. It does not exist. So if you are a better player, then you can get matched with a team of better players against an enemy of bad players, or good players against an enemy of good players. It's how it is. I believe it. The only exception to that is if you're in the very high echelon of players, but that only affects BR. So instead of going up and down 1 BR, you can go down 1 BR, but you can go up 1.3. So that's where that matchmaking comes in, if you are an exceptionally good player, which obviously the majority of people aren't. So when it comes to War Thunder, you are matched with a bunch of randoms. You don't know their skill level, and voice communication can only make that skill level better. Because it means that if someone is a bit of a dodgy shot, right, maybe they find it very hard to hit people, maybe they can communicate that and then you can cover for the weakness. Maybe they're an amazing shot and he just needs a wingman there just to keep him safe. This can all be communicated through voice. It can also be communicated through text, but it takes about 10 times as long. And generally, what you want to do is try and move around your better players. One of the things that I generally do in realistic and simulator battles, after about half the battle's done, I see who has kills, try and gravitate towards them, make sure to keep them alive because I know they can carry me. Another concept that eventually we will go into. But the key thing in all of this is the fact that voice communication makes all of this better. It makes the game, not the gameplay itself, but the games better. Because you are with a bunch of randoms and you have to somehow work out how to kill the enemy team. It also gives people, well, to be quite honest, as I said before, more social interaction. Which in a game, which can take up a hell of a lot of hours of your time, like when I look on my Steam, which isn't, the only time I've played this game, I have 1,600 hours on this game. And that's not including all the times, like for a year, where I used the launcher from War Thunder. And the thing is, when it comes to it, the only thing that really prohibits not using the voice communication is the fact if you think that there's going to be too many voices on the line. And I can completely understand this. When we talk about Halo 3, when we talk about the large game modes, sometimes it can be it could be, very overwhelming to the average person when a lot is going on. It's very hard to make out what's going on, and maybe there's some douche who has decided that playing music over his mic is the best thing to do, or maybe he has his speakers next to his mic. But these can all be solved with some very interesting and simple things. Being able to mute people. Being able to turn off voice communication, which you can already do in War Thunder, so if you don't want it, turn it off. Maybe the way you do it is a blacklist system, so maybe one person in a match is, blasting music, so then you blacklist them and they're always muted. Maybe the mute stays, even if you meet them in another battle. Stuff like that. It's very simple. Put the onus on the user. What I like about War Thunder is that it has a lot of features, which are not primary features in a game. They're not something that the average person is really going to use, or really going to look at and, think, oh yeah, that's really cool, but it has a lot of these small secondary kind of mechanics in the game, gameplay elements, which are interesting, like Shroud music, the Shroud music cannons. They're not something that your average person is going to pick up the game and go, oh, I know how to use them. First of all, you have to set up the buttons for them. In tanks, gunner view and commander view. Another thing you have to set up. Internet radio, as I said before, probably a feature that the majority of people don't use. But it's still there. And for a player like me, I use it quite a lot because I like to listen to my British radio while I'm flying about. And voice communication is one of those things that is not really a necessity, but it makes everything better. There's no downsides to it, especially if you give the onus to the player to control it. Now, so taking what I said before, if you're worried about having large groups of players and having a lot of voices going on at once, what you could do, theoretically, is you could make it so it's only in squads. Now, War Thunder has obviously a system which has been around for at least a while now, maybe a year, maybe less than a year, but basically it automatically puts you in a squad even if you don't go into the battle with a designated squad. If you've ever wondered why you have a number next to your name in the scorecard, but you're not in a squad, that it's basically an automatic squad. It doesn't really mean a lot when it comes to the game. The only thing it really means is that you're able to get supporting fires and teamworks and wingman and stuff like that from it when you're able to. It basically means you can get some of the challenges or medals which you wouldn't normally get because you're not in a squad. So if you wanted voice communication to not be as crazy as having a whole team talking, what you do is once again you put it on the player. So you have options. You can have the first option. You can hear the whole team instead of just certain individuals. You have voice communications open, as I like to say. Now, the next option you can give people is squad only, which means that if you're matched with somebody random, you can still have a chat to them, you can still talk to them. Which, is still good, it is still better than the system that we have. And the fact that this is already in-game, just in a different form, why not just put it in the actual game? Why not just put it into randomness? It's worked in games like Counter-Strike, it's worked in games like Dota 2, it's worked in Halo 3, it's worked in Call of Duty, and it is clamoured for in other games which do not have it. It's even worked in Overwatch, which is, one of the games which is always rising right now when it comes to a new genre that they've created. So, there is no reason to not have it in the game. I don't think it adds a lot more work. It doesn't seem to. The fact that the system's already there, surely you just have to make it so it can be accessed during your normal matches when you're with randoms. Maybe it will take a lot of work, but it doesn't seem like it would. So obviously, the benefits of voice chat is better communication, which influences everything in the game. Communication is key if you're trying to be either competitive or just do well in a game. Communication is your eyes and ears, and it helps you, to be quite honest, do everything. Whether it comes to advice, whether it comes to knowing where people are on the map, whether it comes to anything, absolutely anything in online gaming. Another thing you could do, going back to the options thing, where you either have it open or you have it just for your squad, you could have a third option, which is kind of interesting. You have like an area of effect. So something that a lot of people talk about in War Thunder that they believe should be added is the idea of radar, where you would have basically a circle of radar, and then you could work out where people are. And we already have this in game when it comes to keen vision, but some people believe, and I definitely believe as well, in simulator battles it would be kind of nice if you were flying a plane which had radar installed, or if you were flying a tank or a combat vehicle which did have radar installed, maybe there could be some kind of system which works in an area of effect to kind of let you know where people are. give you that slight advantage because of the plane itself, which means that a lot of planes which aren't as good as some of their counterparts, especially when it comes to simulator, they can be much more useful. Something like an ME410 B6R3, or even the HE, is it 217 or 219, the premium one which got added. So that could be something to think about. And, that could be applied to voice communication. But you'd have to give it to everyone for fairness. You couldn't just give it to people whose aircraft had radios in them, or long-range radios or short-range. It would be kind of clusterfuck, so therefore you'd have to give everyone a sphere of influence. And it could work really well, so that could be your third option for it. So you could only talk to people in your area. Now, the debate would be how big that area would be, and it would also depend on the map. But it could be done, and it could once again give players another option, which is always nice, and something that I always strive for. So, let's go into the issues with voice chat. I can only think of really two large ones, which aren't even large. I mean, one of them is completely ridiculous that we'll get into. So, language barriers is the major large issue, especially with a game like War Thunder. When you have a game which has a large European audience, the one thing about Europe is obviously there's a hell of a lot of different languages going on. So, therefore, voice chat can be a bit of an issue. It can also cause aggravations, nervousness, something like that. If you have a whole team which is just full of German and French players and you're English, and it can get all mumbled up, and, it can kind of get a bit bantery and everything like that. So that's one of the, an issue with it. But once again, put the onus on the player. Let's say that you are in a match on the European server, which I find myself in a lot, and, you're teamed up with a bunch of Spaniards, or at least I am. Now, obviously, I don't speak Spanish. I speak French, so French would be fine. But Spanish, I know a bit, but not a lot. Maybe I could learn some commands, but that's really about it. So, what you would do is once again put the onus on the player to mute people. And it would obviously go both ways. So if you mute someone, therefore they can't hear you either. Which I think would be fine. It would once again put the control of everything in the hands of the player. And generally when it comes to an add-on feature, that's, where I want it to stay. I don't want add-on features to be forced on people. I would rather them be a nice suggestion that is there. The other one is this idea of harassment. Now, there's been a hell of a lot of articles over the last year or so about harassment, especially when it comes to females, even a bloody... Oh, what was that guy? There was a guy who decided that Hearthstone emoting was harassment, and therefore they should get rid of certain emotes because they're only used for BM. Now, when you have a system which can mute people, or which you can turn off entirely, the onus is on that person to just turn it off. If they don't want to listen to it, or maybe they don't want to listen to a certain individual, turn it off. The onus is on you to do something about it. If you feel that somebody is being mean to you, harsh to you, anything like that, you know what you can do? You can report them, you can block them, you can mute them, and then you move on with your life. Instead of trying to ruin their time while they're ruining your time. It is just a completely ridiculous thing to me that the fact that the onus is on the individual to basically not BM or not to be an arsehole. Sometimes people do make bad plays and they have to be called out for it. Sometimes people are just idiots. If you're trying to rid the world of idiots, if you're trying to rid the world of horrible people, I've got news for you. It's not going to happen. They are always going to exist. Same with racists, same with sexists, same with all of this. The issue is when you start catering to the people who say that they're a massive issue, then you're going to have issues, because then your speech is going to be censored. Then you're not going to be able to say certain stuff. Just because this arsehole over here said something, it means that nobody can say it. And you can't do this, especially in an online multiplayer game. Now, because of Gaijin and because of how they work, I doubt they would do this, but all I'm saying is the harassment thing does not stand up in my head. It does not stand up at all when it comes to it. The onus is on the individual to take their own independent decision to either mute, block, and report people. Let the system work for you, instead of trying to mold the system to be what you like. And that's basically it. In summary, voice communication would only make the gaming experience better. There are many examples in the gaming world where voice communication has improved gameplay, and it has improved, basically, just the competitive scene of a game. Most of us, anyway, use Discord, use TeamSpeak. My squads, everybody that I've ever chatted to in War Thunder, apart from right at the start, when I actually, would talk to people in War Thunder when it came to voice communications. So why not just put it in the game? Why not try and, broaden it a little bit? Try and make the game just that little bit better. And obviously make it optional. It should never be forced on people, but it would definitely make the whole gaming experience better. I'll catch you next time.